Okay, excellent. So once again, welcome to Ujima Wednesdays. Welcome to Wednesday, February 16th, 2022 at 6:43 p.m. Tonight, we are with Sue Park, who is talking to us about debt. And a quick introduction of Sue. Dr. Sue Park's scholarship examines the development of American property law, immigration law, and the creation of the American real estate system through the histories of colonization and enslavement. Previously, she was a Critical Race Studies Fellow at UCLA School of Law and an Equal Justice Works Fellow and staff attorney in El Paso, where she investigated predatory mortgage lending schemes as part of Texas RioGrande Legal Aid's foreclosure defense team. Park earned her BA summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa honors from Cornell University, where she was a college scholar, her M.Phil with distinction in social and political sciences from the University of Cambridge, her J.D. cum laude from Harvard Law School, where she was a presidential scholar, and her Ph.D. in Rhetoric from UC Berkeley, where she was a Javits Fellow. Her publications have appeared or are forthcoming in the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Journal, the University of Chicago Law Review, the History of the Present, Law and Social Inquiry, and the New York Times. Welcome, Sue.
Thanks for that introduction, Nia. Sorry it was so long, everybody. I was thinking about what I might want to say to you all, and I thought maybe I would just start out with a couple of things about money and the creation of debt. Has anyone here heard of modern monetary theory? It's sort of a new conversation. It's sort of reviving, the ideas of John Maynard Keynes from earlier in the 20th century, but there's just a whole lot of people who've been talking about it. And it is the set of ideas that the squad is basically drawing on when they put forward their proposals for the Green New Deal, for infrastructure, for things like that. So I thought I would just maybe start with that, because that is the way that we talk about money is in fact not accurate, and just how little understood what money is, in the world, in this country. So basically the idea behind modern monetary theory is that, especially in austerity politics, people tend to talk about the government's money, the federal budget, as being like our household budget, like a pie, and so people tend to say, like, well, if we're spending all this money on warplanes, how come we can't take some of it and put it in education? So that makes a lot of sense for you and for me, who we all just get like a finite paycheck and we have to decide not to do one thing and to do another thing instead. But the federal government's money isn't really like that, because they make the money, right? They print it at the Fed and they decide what the interest rates are going to be and how much of it to print. And so it actually isn't true that it's a finite pie. It is true that if you just print you just go crazy and print it, some problems could arise. But to sort of simplify things, what most economists think is that the point at which inflation happens. So right now we're looking at inflation, and there's a lot of reasons for that, including problems with the global supply chain because of COVID, and things are more expensive and we have less stuff. But putting that aside, our current inflation that we're facing aside, the general theory of when inflation happens is when you have, you're printing so much money, but you have just like too much stuff. And so you have too much stuff and you have more stuff than anyone wants. So it becomes less valuable, right? You have like way more shoes and schools and food and stuff. So it all becomes cheaper because there's less demand. And then you have inflation where your money is just not going as far, right? Does that make sense? So, so the idea is that inflation starts at the point where you're overproducing, but we are not overproducing as a country. In fact, we are not producing almost anything. We are way underproducing, right? We have like way too few good schools. We have way too few, you know what I mean? We pay our teachers too little. We like most of the things that communities need, affordable housing, like all of these things, we actually don't have enough of. We could pour a lot of federal dollars into that and not have inflation, right? We wouldn't have an excess of stuff that nobody needs. We have tons of stuff that people need. And so this idea goes hand in hand with a whole group of people who are advocating for a federal job guarantee. So the idea is that much like the New Deal, the federal government would print a lot more money, but they would put it into these really specific sectors where communities are starved and provide jobs and provide the stuff that people need. And they could do this without triggering, you know, huge differences in the prices of goods for people. Or not that it wouldn't be great to reduce the spending on warplanes and drones and robot dogs and whatever else they're spending money on, but that's not a necessary fight to win to get the stuff our communities need. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's one thing about money that feels pretty important, to just think like a lot of the things that we want to see in our communities is in fact political. I don't know if it's politically possible, like we'll actually get the Fed to do these things, but it is institutionally possible, right? There is a way, and so it's worth asking for. There's very sound economic reasoning behind why the things we would like to see in the world could really happen. The other thing about money that I sort of wanted to put forward for y'all to think about, as you know, we no longer have a gold standard, which means that the amount of money that's getting produced isn't all based on gold stashed in banks or at the Federal Reserve. So really the amount that you can print is pretty unhinged. Like you should make sound decisions based on what you need to spend it on and what you want to see happen in the world. You don't want to print so much that money becomes meaningless, but it's not constrained by our holdings of gold or silver or anything else. So because of this, and also the fact that we have like a really, obviously, you know, credit-based society, a lot of things are purchased by going into debt. Homes, I heard you talking about education. A lot of things happen because debt is produced, right? And because there's no gold standard, when you borrow money from the bank for your house or for a college education, they're not checking their back room to see if they have enough gold to back you for that loan. What they're checking is your creditworthiness, right? So they're checking your employment, they're checking your credit history, they're checking all your numbers and stuff like that. And they're making a judgment about the future. It's not based on something they already have. They're making a judgment about the future. There are a couple people who have this idea, which is true. What they're pointing out is that when banks, any kind of banks, community banks, big banks, Bank of America, makes a loan, what they're in fact doing is putting money into the economy that wasn't there before. Does that make sense to everyone why that is? There was no money there, and they're deciding, you know, to basically just write some numbers to put money in your account based on your future, not on what they actually have to lend you. It's not based on something they're holding. It's about the future. So when they make a decision about your creditworthiness, they are in fact making a payment on your behalf that you will pay back over time with lots of interest. So they'll make money. Good bet for them. Good money-making endeavor. But they're also, by creating that loan, injecting money to the economy, because whoever you bought your car from gets it, right? Whoever you're paying for your school gets it. That's money on their accounts that they then have to spend. So every time a loan is produced, money is produced in the economy. And our economy grows by producing loans, which means producing debt, which is kind of a scary thought. So what these people are saying in part is that not only can the Federal Reserve do whatever it wants, is it has also made banks, private banks, franchises of the government. They have given the government the power to make money that only the Federal Reserve has. They've actually made every bank a franchise by authorizing them to make loans to people that increases the total amount of money in circulation in our economy, which is mostly debt that people are holding. A ton of money is produced by debt. So money is produced by debt because people get paid when people go into debt to buy stuff or to pay for college or whatever it is. So money is made that way, but money is also made in other ways because your debt is a commodity that then gets packaged and sold and traded. So then there's all these financiers who are making more money by buying and selling your debt. So on several levels, the production of debt puts a lot of money into the economy because every one of those trades is also based on interest. It's a bet, right? People are betting against each other. I'm going to buy these debts. You're going to buy those debts. We're going to trade them. Hopefully they'll go up in value. That's based on the interest you're paying, but it's also a speculation. People are making money every step of the way based on future projections about things that people are going to pay and making them exist before anyone has paid them. And so the economy just grows and grows through debt that way. Kind of scary if you think about it. Also, if you see that lots of people, you already know this part, right? The fact that a lot of people hold your debt and that's their money basically means that there's an incentive to produce more debt, to make more of you go into debt, buy stuff, go to college, whatever, because that's another commodity that people can buy and sell. So there's a whole market for the production of that, which, I said before that we're like really underproducing. We don't have enough, clean water, good food, good schools, all that stuff. We spend a lot of energy making debt and making money by making debt. So maybe I'll just say that. I've been talking for a little bit, but curious to hear what you think about those ideas. Hi, this is my cat. Shh. Anyone have any thoughts? Oh, sorry.
Well, I think it's really disturbing that so much money is debt and selling and other people managing the debt, and so that all this new money is coming in, but all it is debt. I've never really understood that. That is very upsetting.
Eric's hand is up. And
Yeah,
feel
I was
free, just go ahead and just talk, y'all.
I was just gonna say, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things I saw in this film, Zeitgeist, was saying that the Federal Reserve is not even part of, it's a private corporation on top of that. So that's accurate too, right?
I'm not a total expert on the Federal Reserve, but most government institutions, sorry about that, are part private and part public. So good example are like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They used to be public, but they were really explicitly kind of split up or made to be actually controlled by a private corporation. So a whole lot of government agencies are in fact run by private corporations.
From what I understand, it's not even a government organization at all. It just has the name federal, like a corporation that just uses a certain name, that it's a separate entity, and the US government actually purchases the printed money from the Federal Reserve, which is a private business, with an interest rate. So just in the creation of it, there's a debt that's owed to this private thing. So there's a film called The Zeitgeist on YouTube, and the first segment is about the financial industry. And what it goes into is basically what you're saying, but it expands on it and saying that the Federal Reserve is actually a private entity that has a relationship with the federal government. And because the name is federal, we assume that it's part of the government, but it's owned and operated separate from the federal government.
So I'm not sure that's 100% accurate. So the president does appoint the chair of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is housed here with other government agencies. So it is the central bank of the United States. It is the United States, but the point that it has a board of people whose mostly their experiences in private corporations, and that it operates like private banks. And then the fact that it creates policy that enfranchises every private bank in the way I was saying to make money by making loans, gives it a very strong relationship, obviously, with private corporations and the private sector, but it is the Bank of the United States. It is a part of the government. Yeah. And the person who makes the decisions about it is employed by the US government, is a federal employee, is appointed by the president. So it really matters who you choose, you know, whether it's Bernanke, whether it's Janet Yellen, whoever it is, like those appointments matter a lot, just like any political appointee. They have obviously a huge amount of power to control monetary policy for the entire United States. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm really curious about the sort of credit score, credit history infrastructure of this like layer to this convo, as someone who has student debt and is trying to manage that. I think it is curious that, at least for me, I noticed that when I pay off a certain part of my student loan debt faster than they might expect, it actually causes a slight dip in my credit score. And I think not enough people talk about that in terms of like, there's so many different things that go into your credit score in terms of the mix and number and who's holding them and all these things. And it feels like we're almost not incentivized to pay off debt too quickly, or else they won't make their money back, etc. Can you talk a bit about like credit and how that all works in terms of like who's incentivized to do what, etc.?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. You're noticing a really important thing, and it's even worse when you finish paying that debt, your credit score is going to go down noticeably. Why? Because you're no longer making regular payments on a debt. So it's not even just that you're incentivized not to pay it off too quickly or too much. It's that you're incentivized to never not be holding debt. As long as you are holding major debt and are demonstrating regular payments, this is what gives you your creditworthiness. Of course, this also has huge implications for the way our population is already segmented, right? Already it's the fact that communities with lower income and communities of color are more cash-based economies. It's just a fact. So there's less opportunity to build the kind of credit score that is the basis for so much of this economy, right? So what you're noticing, you know, is just structurally a part of the whole thing. Yeah, you can see that kind of priority on everybody holding debt. Like our economy really depends on everyone having debt at all times. Totally disturbing, in my opinion.
Barry's hand is up.
Yeah, I have one thing confused me, the idea that banks actually create money by making loans. I always had the impression that the bank had to have the money either in deposits or in investments or in some form in order to make a loan. Am I totally off base?
The primary thing that banks look at when they make a loan is your creditworthiness and all. There is some relationship to the deposits, but that's not controlling. The main factor is whether or not someone is creditworthy. And in fact, lots of institutions besides banks make loans all the time. As you know, there's tons of private lenders at every scale, huge institutional kind of multi-state organizations, every state banks, like the big ones that you all know about. But also locally, there's just lots of people making loans. They are probably basing it on whatever reserve they have. But the big banks are authorized to just make these loans not only based on their deposits in ways that create new money. They just inject money into the economy by making the payment, the upfront payment that someone needs to make to enroll in school, to take that car off the lot, to move into their house. The projection of the return of future interest is the main basis for that. The paper is called The Finance Franchise, if you're interested in reading more about it. I'll find it and link it.
Yeah, okay, Sue, you're reading my mind a little bit. I was actually gonna ask, are there any kind of additional text or resources you would recommend as primers in one instance, and I guess maybe just really good information in another instance?
I mean, if you want to learn more about modern monetary theory, it got like a lot of press in the last few years. So I actually think there's like a pretty good Vice article about it that's very accessible as kind of a starting point. It is like a lot of pretty awesome young activists who are involved in it, and they do stuff a lot and kind of write in on a lot of different social issues. So you can find their stuff pretty easily. Let me see if I can find anything for you. But yeah, I mean, I would just recommend just reading up a little bit on that. What's her name? One of the biggest figures there. So this is like a really good accessible book. Stephanie Kelton's The Deficit Myth. She's kind of the main economist who really sort of tells her whole story of like, she didn't used to believe this, but then, you know, someone pointed it out and she just ran the numbers again and again and again and was like, oh my gosh, all of orthodox economics is right-wing propaganda, you know? So I would check that out. If you're interested in the financing piece of it, you know, like why the government can actually fund the things that people are asking for.
Thank you, Kesu.
Yeah.
Would you recommend, and I might be getting his name wrong, but is it David Graeber who wrote on debt?
Oh yeah,
Would you
he has
recommend that
big
text?
book. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting book, and he sort of starts with this conversation he has at a like a cocktail party or something, where he's talking to someone who's like a social justice, I forget, lawyer, advocate, something like that, and he's talking about kind of like sovereign debt, you know, countries' debt. And she's like, well, you have to pay back your debts. I mean, if you borrowed, you have to pay it back. And he was like, why does everybody think this? So he wrote this 5,000-year history of debt. So it is really interesting if you want to hear about how people have thought about debt and how debt sort of evolved all over the world for 5,000 years. It's pretty accessible. It's just a very sweeping history. And I feel like my work is pretty sweeping, but it's not 5,000 years. It's only 400 years of American history, because I'm really trying to figure out what's going on here and why we're facing the political situation we're facing. So that book is kind of hard, because maybe you'll be reading a lot about like, you know, Mesopotamia or something. And I personally am just like, that's very interesting, but how does that help me now? So that's my caveat to that.
I had a question, I guess two. The first is, I guess, back to the student debt conversation. And there's a lot of discussion now around asking Biden to forgive, you know, a certain amount of federal student loans. If he were to do that, would that actually cause any like big hoopla in the Fed or throughout the federal government if he were to do that?
Oh yeah, are you kidding? There's a big hoopla and he hasn't even done it. There's a big hoopla because somebody suggested it. So the guy who wrote that paper, who said that Biden has the legal authority to do that, is in fact a modern monetary theorist guy who is also part of this community that I'm part of called Law and Political Economy. And some of the stuff is maybe more accessible than others, but there is this whole blog that talks about all kinds of stuff that maybe you're interested in. And you can just browse around and see there for sure. The people who wrote that thing about the finance franchise are part of this community and write for it. So there are a lot of people talking about monetary theory and debt in here. I have some stuff in there. I wrote a response to Keeanga Yamada Taylor's Race for Profit book when it came out. So if you're interested, there's like a lot of short blog posts that hopefully are accessible and interesting and illuminating.
So what would the hoopla be?
Oh, the hoopla is just like a big fuss, right? I mean, it is possible he could just do it and it would be great, but he has like industry breathing down his neck, like all the people who make money off of that debt, right? So what we talked about before, that debt is all money in somebody else's pocket. I mean, they really don't want to lose that, you know? So, and they have a much more direct line to like every politician than every indebted student. So, you know, so it's a rough political scene, but he absolutely could do it. And that is kind of the thing that I think a lot of the most radical people in Washington are sort of pushing him to do. Like, this is a big thing you could do by yourself easily now, and it would have huge effect and provide so much relief to your constituency. But he is afraid of the political backlash and the hoopla.
Yeah, thank you for that. Onia asked, could he do it with private loans as well, or just federal?
I have to admit that I don't know all about the law with the student loans, all kinds of loans. I don't know about all kinds of loans, if he could do it or not. There are a lot of complications to just canceling loans. I will say that. So I would love to see every loan extinguished. You all know about the Debt Collective, right? Yeah. So the Debt Collective does a lot of work on this stuff. But for example, I do a lot of work on foreclosure and mortgages, and it would be, as much as I would love to see all mortgage debt disappear or get forgiven, it would be really hard to do that. Why? Because the investment scheme between different sectors of the economy they're really embedded in one another. So one of the biggest investors in mortgage-backed securities, which would basically go belly up if we forgave all mortgage debt and there were no mortgage debts to buy, is the pension system. So that's a lot of people's pensions that don't have any money if we get rid of the mortgage system. So it's all really like, it's terribly dependent on each other. And this is a structural issue. And that would really have to change. I mean, you could think about how to cancel mortgage debt, but then you'd have to figure out a new pension system, a different way to pay everybody. So it's just a lot of different systems are interlinked with one another, which makes total cancellation of debt in a lot of areas hard. I think that the reason they're advocating for student loans is that they don't have quite the same entanglements. It's pretty new also, that's why. Student debt has really ballooned, as you know, over the last couple decades.
Yeah, I was going to go there next. I'm glad you brought it up already in terms of mortgages. I was going to ask about the 2008 financial crisis and like what role debt played in that, and if it's going to happen again, like if we're in a bubble right now, and if that's going to happen again in a different, like soon or like in the future.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest with you. We're not in exactly the same place. So what happened then was really specific, but that doesn't mean we're not in a bubble now. The bubble that happened then, as you know, was really specifically the result of just making bad loans, like tons of them. And it was really the bankers that were doing it. They were doing it to all people. There's like this myth that it was poor people who like didn't have access to credit, who just were silly enough to buy homes. But in fact, there were like a lot of really wealthy white people who bought second and third homes during that time, because the banks were just pushing more mortgage loans on everybody with like really unrealistic terms, and on the basis of really poor numbers, like people across the board couldn't pay that back. And as you know, they all crashed at once. So that's kind of how the market got overheated then. I mean, I teach a whole class on this. And one thing I really want my students to think about is like, when did things go wrong? And I would suggest to you that was not just at that single moment when there were so many incentives to create really risky loans, right? With like huge balloon payments. They called them ninja loans, like not checking income, job, assets at all. Loans with like just buried terms that were gonna trip people up and ensure that they failed, no matter how hard they were trying. So, but the fact of the matter is, sorry, I'm like, could really go deep on this. The fact of the matter is, the whole project of securitizing and pooling loans didn't really get off the ground until like the 90s. So we had these big government engines, government sponsored entities, they're called GSEs, right? Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae. They were created, but they were kind of slow. And industry was getting really frustrated. So we have a public recording system that means anytime you buy or sell an interest in property, including a mortgage, you're supposed to go record it in the county register. Do y'all know this? So like there's a county register in every single county in the country. where all the property records are. And you're supposed to be able to go and see like who owns everything and who has a mortgage on anything, and it's public and it's local and it's accessible to everybody. So this was very annoying to the people who wanted to buy and trade mortgages, because it really slows you down in like pooling 10,000 mortgages and slicing them up and selling them to someone else. If you have to go back to every county where each piece of property is and record the transfer of that mortgage thing. So they stuck a placeholder shell company in the records everywhere called MERS, Mortgage Electronic Registration System. So they stuck a placeholder there, and then they proceeded to pool and securitize and trade and slice and dice behind that wall. And it was optional to keep the records. So this made it go a lot faster. It made it possible to securitize a lot more mortgages a lot faster. And this led to this kind of like overheating and flushing money into the thing to make more mortgages, to do this some more. You know, the driver of like making more mortgages is the money that comes out of pooling them and selling them and getting investors to invest in them. And so arguably that's one of the things that led to the financial crash. And then guess what? We have the crash and they're trying to foreclose on everybody, and nobody can prove what mortgage they owned because they're not keeping any records. So that was awful. And litigation, some of it, I think, might still be going on. If not, it was until very recently. So it's actually a Massachusetts court case from the SJC called Ibanez that they tried to foreclose on a guy, and the bank couldn't show their chain of title. They couldn't show that they owned the mortgage. It had been securitized and passed around, and they just could not show the direct line of how they got that mortgage. So the bank in Massachusetts was like, you cannot foreclose on this guy because you can't prove you own the mortgage. And that was a shock to the industry, which really was a big decision. It could have gone the other way. Most places were like, sure, foreclose. You probably owned it. You know, you own like 10,000 other mortgages. You probably own that one. We believe you. But the SJC said, no, you have to have the paper trail. So ever since then, they're keeping better records in MERS. Not because they're like good, you know, but because they are really afraid that they won't be able to foreclose if this ever happens again. So sorry, I just want to tell you all that. So it's not just kind of like greedy people making too many loans or credit rating agencies kind of turning a blind eye to the fact that everything is crap. Those things happened, but even before that, you just had an overheating of the mortgage production market that is like, who said that was a good idea? You know, nobody authorized it. No one said they could create MERS. They just did it. And before anyone knew it, 66% of all mortgages were held in that system. Pretty bad.
Thank you, Kesu. Oh, this will be the last question, and then we'll transition into member team meetings. Eric?
May I ask a question?
Okay,
please?
2 questions. Yeah, sure. Regina and then Eric, and then we'll close out the meeting, and we'll turn on, or we'll close out the workshop and turn off the recording and transition to member team meetings.
Okay. Casey, would you kindly go into more, give a deeper dive on the interest rate and the role that it plays into pumping more money into the system?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Could you take a deeper dive and go into the interest rate and the effects that it has on pumping more money into the system?
The Fed's interest rates?
Yes.
This is a really great question. So I know more about it historically than I know what's happening right now. But raising interest rates, as you know, has always been a part of austerity politics. And this was something that a lot of people were organizing against in like the 70s. And Reagan was really the person who came in and raised the interest rates and led us into the current place. Actually, Coretta Scott King was a huge advocate against interest rates because everybody knew that what was going to happen if the Fed raised interest rates was that employers were going to fire a lot of people, mostly poor people, people of color. And that was a hit that they decided to take. that was just a hit they decided to take in order to make the dollar more valuable in the world market. So I actually have a friend who wrote a really great paper about all this stuff that I'd be happy to share.
Oh, that'd be great.
His name is David Stein. And maybe Mia, I'll send you this paper.
Cool. Thank you, Kesu.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And I see you have your hand up, Louise. I want to give you a chance to ask a question or say something. If you can make it quick, like real quick, like 3 seconds, and then Eric, and then we should close out because I see the Anchor Institution team coming in, so we don't want to encroach on their time too much. Louise,
Okay,
you got something quick for us?
Yeah, I
All
just
right.
put some in the chat about, they said because of deregulation, they gave the loans to people they knew they couldn't pay it back. You know, the banks did that.
Right, that
Because
was
they could sell the loans in bulk and get their money up front and then pass it on.
definitely part of it. Yeah. Along with all the other things that we talked about. Yeah.
Thank you, Louise. And Eric, you're gonna round us out.
I guess the question I have for our community, there's so many people purchasing homes above market rate and corporations buying homes at a rapid rate. The community I'm in is being gentrified dramatically over the last 50 years. They built a highway through the community, eminent domain to build a lot of stuff. And now I'm curious how the effect of this massive purchasing of homes is going to impact the economy too in our community in terms of displacement and property values.
Not purchased by people in your community. You mean like the all cash purchases by these new? Yeah,
Yes.
it's really very bad. Unfortunately, we don't know a ton about it because it's all so opaque and they can just hide behind LLCs. So we don't even really know who they are or how much they're buying. But yes, what is happening right now is that there are all cash purchases being made by investors whose models are different than the models we've seen before. So it used to be, y'all are in Boston, so you know City Realty. You know, that used to be like one big bad corporate landlord in Boston or in Philly or in DC. It's not really like that anymore. Now we've got these like multi-state huge corporations that are armchair, like they're crowdsourcing investment. Do you know what I mean? It's like Blackstone is like, put in $100 and you can become a property investor. And that's how they get the money to buy in all cash. And we don't know who they are or who's controlling them or where the money's going. It's sorry, this is like a very scary thing, actually. Like we just actually don't know. This is new and it's evolving really quick. And it's because industry is so innovative. So yeah, this is like something I'm working on, is like trying to deal with the anonymity in the record by the use of all LLCs. But it's changing in real time. You know what I mean? I don't know what's going to happen. It's really bad, but like all of these things always happen because nobody's paying any attention. And so hopefully soon more people will be like, pay attention. Our whole property system is completely changing under your nose because, you know, you think like real law is something else. Sorry, I don't have anything good, hopeful to add to that.
Thank you, Kesu. And it's interesting. It's funny because I'll turn off the recording soon, but I was also just reflecting on how calmly you're talking about all of this stuff.
Well, you know, it's my job. I mean, I am really upset about it, but I also have to do it all day, every day. So,
well, thank you so much. This wraps us up. I will turn off the recording now. Okay, I will stop the recording now.